Um, let me start. Let me start with a story, okay? In a few years back in Manhattan, there was a series of talks I was asked to give in the Jewish preschools, a bunch of preschools in the heart of New York City. These are modern Orthodox places. And the sponsor was the head of a school who told me the following story. Okay, she said that in her neighborhood in Manhattan, every year the age that kids first get to have a smartphone has been decreasing by 1 year every year. When I was there, it was grade 4 when this story took place. Then I've been back, grade 3, now I actually hear that it's grade 1. Okay, so you're talking about kids getting smartphones at incredibly early ages, mostly the latest model Apple iPhone 10. So there's a group of fourth graders, fourth grade girls, who the head of school, in the school I was giving the talk in, invited me to speak to. And she tells me that the morning before my talk, she walks in on the grade 4 class, and a group of fourth grade girls are trading pornography on their smartphone. Okay. That's not the shocking part. The shocking part is what happened next. What happened next is she was shocked. She turns to the girl whose phone it was, who was trading the picture. She said, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. That's totally inappropriate. This is a Jewish school. We believe in the holiness of what connections and relationships are about, and this is everything we don't believe in. You can't do it. And the girl and all of her friends looked at her in total confusion. She says, what? She just didn't get it. No shame, no pullback response. So she takes the phone away from the girl who was trading the pictures. And that night, she gets a furious phone call from the mother of the girl and saying, how dare you take my daughter's phone away? She says, look, you don't even have a filter on the phone. You're not monitoring what she's doing. It's a phone where she could get anything she wants, any image, and not only that, it's impacting on the rest of the school. I can't give her the phone back until you guarantee me that you've taken proper precautions to give your daughter lessons on how to responsibly use this powerful device. The mother starts screaming at her. She demands that she gives the phone back, and she hangs up the phone on her. Of course, the head of school refuses to give the phone back. Next morning, the girl walks into school with the brand new latest model of the iPhone. So that's the opening story. Not such a crazy story. That's an extreme. It's where the world might be going to. Because in order to there's a concept in Judaism of constructive shame. Okay, we all know the characterologic shame, where you feel broken or dirty or terrible about yourself. It's not good. It's associated with depression, and it's certainly not associated with better control. But when you think about the etymology, according to some, of the Hebrew word for constructive shame, busha. So busha literally is a break in the flow. So some say that it could be thought of as being tied to the word to step back. It says in the Torah that when Moshe was late in coming back from getting the Torah, and the Jews were frightened, they said, Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe. Moshe was holding back from returning, and they were frightened. Sisra's mother, the general's mother, is very nervous that something terrible happened to her son. And it says, she's very worried, ki boshesh milavo. In every culture in the world, the word for shame, which also might even be tied to the word yavesh, to be dry, okay, is a break in the flow. Break in the flow. So in every culture, if you see a picture of somebody in a constructive shame response, it's a step back and a looking down. Enough to give you time to think, is this worthy of my values? It's a very constructive thing. Okay, we want our children to have clarity about our values regarding what's incredibly accessible right in their pockets. And that's the first important point here, is to understand, it's interesting, the Musar masters call that kind of shame tachshit l'chol hamidos. They call it, basically, it's almost like not only the ornament that decorates, the core aspect of becoming a mensch, but it's also at the core of what we want our children to do. We want them to so internalize what we stand for that before they engage in a behavior that's not worthy of the way we've raised them, you want them to at least take a step back and say, is this worthy of me? Is this worthy of the kind of life that I want to live? There was a boy who, a psychologist in Brooklyn, who told me the following story. The story goes like this. This psychologist comes to me after I give a talk in Brooklyn a few years back. And one of the things I talked about in the talk is the power of the blessing that many parents give their children Friday night, the power of the bracha. Because sometimes we pour our heart and soul into recognizing the uniqueness of our children. And in some ways to say we believe in them. I had a slide I took out that talks about that in a magnificent way, but I want to use our time in a practical way. So I'm taking out some of that stuff, which maybe I'll share with you some other time. So I talked about this concept to a group of my colleagues. After the talk, waiting for me is a clinical psychologist in Flatbush. He said, you were talking about the power of a bracha and the power of expectations. And he says, I had an amazing session in my office this morning. There was a 15-year-old boy, and he had been acting out quite a bit. He'd become rebellious, and his parents were very worried that he was completely leaving our way of life. They were worried sick about him. And they sent him to see me. And his goal in life was to be accepted by a group of kids who were basically the worst possible kids for him to be involved with. There were kids who were into drugs, there were kids who were involved in gang activity, and there were kids who had grown up Orthodox but left our way of life. And they hung out in a pool hall in Flatbush that he was dying to be part of that subgroup. So he told the therapist that morning in therapy, he said, the night before, Saturday night in Flatbush, the dream of his lifetime came through. Okay? He was walking past the pool hall, and the head of that gang sees him and decides to, let me give this kid a try. He had heard he's trying to join our group. So he casually invites him in, and this is like a dream come true for this young boy. And after a couple of hours, he decides to test him. And he goes into his shirt pocket, the head of the gang, and he takes out some kind of a designer drug. And he casually offers it to this boy. Say, try this, it's amazing what it'll do for you. And the kid tells him in his office that morning, as I was reaching for the drug, the look of love in my father's eyes when he blessed me Friday night, the night before, comes flashing into my head, at the must yukno moment that's well known in Jewish thinking about the power of Joseph and his father's love for him is controlling him when he was sexually tempted. So he's tempted by the wife of his master, and somehow the love and belief of his father in him, and the fact that his father taught him core Jewish values like gratitude. How could I show a lack of gratitude to my master by doing this? And it comes flashing in his substance. So the kid says, I just see my father's benching me. My father is blessing me, and I took the drug, I throw it in this kid's face, I run out of the pool hall, and he tells his therapist Sunday morning, he says, I'm taking a solemn oath, doc. For the rest of my life, I swear to you, I will never go back into that pool hall. Power of love, the power of love, okay? Power of expectation, the power of believing in your child, and the power of constructive busha. So I'll say that by way of opening. Let's keep going. This next set of slides is about kind of the gold standard study. Sadly, most researchers in the United States haven't been able to find a control group of boys and men to understand the impact of pornography, because to be able to do that, you have to get a substantially large enough group of boys and men who have never been exposed to pornography. No such group exists in any of the research done in the United States. So what we have to rely on is the gold standard study, very old. It was done back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, before there was universal exposure of boys and men to pornography. Not to say that this isn't an issue for women also, but it's a very different kind of challenge for men. So what they did is they randomly assigned two groups of boys, of students, one to a group that was exposed to pornography as part of the study, and another group that wasn't. And they looked at what happened to them over a period of time. So it's a pretty pure study back then. They're saying it can never be done again. In the age of the smartphone, it can't be replicated. So we're stuck with this, as impure as it is. Here's what they found, okay? They found that males who were in the pornography group, they showed increased callousness to women. Just think about that. Their treatment of women became less special, less caring, the opposite of what we'd want, okay? Number two, they started to view rape as less serious. It literally shaped their values into the opposite of what we call kedusha, how we view sexuality, which is about sanctity, which is about holiness, which is about special relationships. Their drive for seeing pornography kept growing. In other words, at the beginning, you could see regular old pornography, but then they kept needing to see more and more extreme depictions of pornography, okay? That happened to that group. Next, and this frightens me quite a bit, and it's research that has since been replicated in different ways, they became more accepting of not being faithful in marriage. The cornerstone of Jewish values, okay? Faithfulness in marriage. The cornerstone of a healthy marriage in general, which is fidelity and faithfulness. And knowing that you're in it together, side by side, in spite of your differences, and that you're going to deal with the inherent differences between man and women, which is a source of growth and a source of really what makes us our best, okay? And instead, you don't have to deal with that. You turn to pornography, and it makes it more likely that in real life you're going to act it out more, okay? Men experience a decreased desire for children, and women who were pornography users in this study a decreased desire to have a daughter. Just think about the implications of that. It gets to the core of your soul. It gets to the core of your identity. By the way, I know that many of you are here, and many, many people here have struggled with pornography. This talk is not meant to awfulize. It's not meant to rob people of hope. Our souls and your souls are just as pure. This morning, those men who pray every morning say a beautiful, beautiful prayer. Elokai nishama shenasata bi tahorahi. God, the soul that you gave to me, it's pure. You breathed it into me, okay? You gave it to me at the beginning of my life, and you're going to give it back to me. I have to give it back to you at the end of my life. Let's keep it pure. It's still pure. We have to figure out how to make it happen. We're going to talk about some strategies, okay? Okay? Next, more subtle point is in a large-scale survey, they found that most adolescents get their information about sexuality online and from pornography. When I speak alone to groups of teenage boys, and after meeting with them and their teachers, and then later at night with their parents, I have them alone. It could be large groups of boys, and it could be the whole spectrum. I've done this in Hasidic yeshivas in Williamsburg and New Square and Monroe County. I've done it in modern places. I've done it in co-ed schools. I've done it everywhere, okay, in different parts of the world. One of the first things I do is I give out cards to the boys when I'm meeting with boys alone. And I say, talk to them a little bit about sexuality. And I'll say, look, I know a lot of people struggle, and I know you're not going to talk about this publicly. I say, write down one question you have about what you're involved in on a card. I'll never be able to trace it to you. And whatever we talk about in here will stay in this room. And I say, and at least some of you are going to need to make jokes. I love jokes. You need to make, what is it? They say art is making something out of nothing. Humor is making nothing out of something. So some of you, and they write great jokes. So I said, but after you get the jokes out of your system, take an extra card and write what's really on your heart. And it's amazing, the pain that so many boys are in. They're feeling dirty. They're feeling damaged. They're feeling beyond hope. Okay? And they say there's nobody they could talk to. They feel they can't possibly talk to their parents because they say, my parents would kill me if they knew. And they can't talk to their teachers because their teachers often believe that it's at the home that this has to be talked about. So what are they left with? They're left with the vacuum of getting their information about sexuality from these sites. The last thing that we want. But when you give voice to values, you have to name the monster. You have to name the monster. You have to be able to talk about it. Okay. Then there's the issue. I won't go into it in much detail, but it happens more than one might think. The girls in high schools, even in Jewish high schools, are put under a tremendous amount of pressure if they have a boyfriend, okay? And even if just a friend, even if they're in a ultra-observant part of the world, but they're sort of sneaking through texting. It's much easier to meet each other now, no matter what kind of yeshiva you go to. And there's pressure. If you really love me, you'll send me a special picture of yourself. And it's shocking that sometimes I'll give a talk in neighborhoods not that different than this, maybe slightly to the right of this neighborhood. And the kids will start opening up to me about how they are very embarrassed. They sent pictures of themselves to boys. The boys, of course, would never have violated their trust, but their best friend has their password. And their best friend goes through their smartphone and says, wow, look at this. And then we'll send it as a group email to the whole community. This isn't a rare occasion, I hear story after story after story like this. Again, I'm not here to horrify you, but it's the reason why you have to talk to your kids about this. You have to talk to your kids about internet security. You have to talk to your daughters about how to handle that kind of pressure. Again, it may be unheard of here. That would be wonderful. But I'd rather at least raise the possibility, because again, to quote Bruno Bettelheim, that which cannot be named cannot be put to rest. You have to talk about it. Next. Well, you just saw what I did there, Talking about it is the way you transmit values. Now, let's talk about what's so bad about this. Isn't this prudish? Here you have this old guy, 67, I think, or 68. Forget how old I am. Is my wife here? Okay. How old am I? I'm in my 60s. I'm in my late 60s, okay? So you may say, well, look, I didn't have to worry about this, but this is just the new way of being. What difference does it make? What difference does it make? Okay. Here's what we know from the more recent studies. And this is what you see over and over again. The problem is pornography conveys harmful ideas about sex. People are portrayed as objects. The part of the brain that lights up when you're in an I-thou relationship, a real connected relationship, it's a special part of the brain that's made for deep interpersonal connection. That's the way we feel when we have eye-to-eye, heart-to-heart contact with those we love or even with people we're connecting to. But there's a different part of the brain dedicated to objects, to things. You know what part of the brain lights up when you're dealing with pornography and looking at women and all of these sexual kind of activity? Not the part of the brain that lights up for the interpersonal, not the I-thou, it's I-it. The woman becomes an it. She becomes an it. Violence, humiliation, and recklessness becomes what our sons are primed to imprint on as a source of excitement. Another thing is, I didn't want to put in the slide on this, but men are biologically wired to be aroused by novelty. So you're always looking for new, more exciting pictures with different women. And it's very easy for our brains to be hijacked by this in a way that leads to real addiction. Okay, so this conditions arousal to self-centered, sensually blunted, and loveless sex, the opposite of what we want, the opposite of Kedusha. I'm not using the word Kedusha just as a euphemism. The true Hebrew word for sexuality is sanctity, it's holiness. In fact, all the research shows is that when married people are intimate with each other, the sexual experience is far more exciting and far more bonding, and you get far more satisfaction than a person who is raised on this model of I-it as opposed to I-thou sexuality. Okay? Porn mistress. Getting calls from college teachers after a wedding in the more actively observant part of the community. But I'm hearing this all over in the secular part of the community, that men who are heavy users of pornography, here's what they start to think, okay? Pornography becomes their mistress, always ready, willing, reliably sexy, never says no, you don't have to deal with challenge, no demands are made, it never gets old because she's always willing to try something new, okay? And there's a story of one man, even though he loved his wife and experienced satisfying sex with her, found pornography to be the best sex ever, okay? It's compelling, and it's not so demanding. And contrast this to the essence of a healthy male-female relationship. The Tiferes Yisrael, a great rabbi in the early 1800s, writes in his commentary on the Mishnah that embedded in the Hebrew word for marriage, the word nisuin, embedded in that word are two words. The word masa, which is the Hebrew word for a burden, saying that the differences inherent between men and women can weigh you down. They could be a source of weighing down. But if you work on the relationship and you make it I thou and you stick with it, the word masa in Hebrew also means a prophecy or a song. We transform the burden into a transcendent song and prophecy. That only comes if you stay with it, and if you stay with the conflict, and if you grow through it. Or as one of the major experts on marriage says, marriage is a people-growing machine. We grow through the struggle. So when I got married, I've had 42 years so far, thank God, of wonderful, wonderful marriage. My wife came from a wonderful family, who many of you I know, okay, where time was just a basic idea. If something was called for 11 o'clock on a given day, it could have been 11 o'clock in the morning, it could have been 11 o'clock at night. Time was general. In my family growing up, my father, who was a rabbi, right, whose first anniversary of his death is in a couple hours, he would be very precise about time. If he was officiating at a funeral and it was called for 11 o'clock, he'd start the funeral at 11, even if the person who had died wasn't there yet. Everything was done, okay? He was much nicer than that, and he got much better in his old age, but he was very, very precise about time, okay? When I got married, what happened? Exactly what needed to happen, because we stayed with each other. First wedding we're invited to in our marriage. I'm ready to leave for the reception of the wedding at 5:13 p.m. because I had an internal map before Google Maps, before Waze, knowing that in order to get to the reception on time, I had to leave at 5:13. I just knew, and I was always exactly right. I call up to my wife, I say, I'm going to be waiting in the car, it's time to go. And she wasn't even beginning to think about what dress to wear for the wedding. Now, what happened in the last 42 years? Exactly what needed to happen. I wanted to please her, she wanted to please me, okay? She knew that through the marriage, she needed to learn how to be more careful about time. I needed to learn that if I missed a wedding reception and didn't make it in time to eat all that food, it was really good for me, okay? And I grew in the area I needed to grow in. I grew to be more relaxed about time. And my wife grew to be more careful about time. And the masa, what could have been a burden, grew into a transcendent song, and we grew in exactly the areas we needed to grow in. This isn't just about time, it's about patience. It's about everything. Marriage is a people-growing machine. Whereas my father would always say, couples don't have to think alike, they have to think together. But it's in the process of learning how to think together that you grow. But if you're online with pornography, and you're instead taking all of that energy for connection and squandering it, you never grow in the same way. It's a lost opportunity, and divorce rates become higher, potentially. Look at this, okay? Here's some of the addictive properties. Pornography stimulates the reward and pleasure centers of the brain instantly, dramatically increasing the production of dopamine, which is associated with sexual arousal and drug highs, okay? Increased production of feel-good chemicals like adrenaline, endorphins, etc., okay? And it sets you up on what psychologists call an intermittent variable reinforcement schedule. As you're surfing the internet to find the most stimulating kind of images, and sometimes you'll hit it, sometimes you won't. It's just like the way psychologists program the slot machines in gambling casinos. to get a payoff every once in a while unpredictably, the strongest form of learning. And you put that together, especially with an adolescent brain, and you have the ingredients of what could be an addiction. Women report increased pressure to act like women are portrayed in pornography and respond to pornography-inspired sexual advances. And here's the bottom line slide, and then I'm going to get to what to do about it. Bottom line slide says the following, okay? In the American Academy of Pediatrics, they did a comprehensive recent review of research on the impact of pornography, a very well done review, released relatively recently. And here's what they find in children and adolescents who are heavy users of pornography. Okay? Higher rates of depression. Why? Depression is when you're not connected to yourself. Pulls you away from the opposite of depression. That's what I talked about earlier, okay? Connection to the 3 F's of family, friends, and faith. Depression is when you're pulled away from meaning, and you're pulled into meaninglessness, and you start to feel bad, and the source of meaning and purpose life sort of gets away from you. Anxiety, we just had the last talk about. Sometimes acting out in violent behaviors they find, okay? You're more likely to become sexually involved with a member of the opposite sex earlier than you would have otherwise, which is associated with bad outcomes sometimes. Increased risk for teen pregnancy, distorted view of relationships, as I said before, okay? And then I'm going to add one more component before I get to recommendations, and that's that it's harder for people who are observant. I'm going to share with you some challenging information that you have to know about, okay? It goes like this, okay? If I tell you to spend the next 5 minutes not thinking of a pink elephant, right? Whatever you do, don't think of a pink elephant. Please don't think of a pink elephant. Whatever you do, don't think of a pink elephant. What's going to happen, everybody? All we're going to see is this image, okay? Here's what the research in the United States shows. In evangelical parts of the United States, where people are strongly anti-pornography and are extremely, they're biblical literalists who are extremely strict, getting crazy about any kind of pornography or any kind of non-biblically endorsed sexual activity. Here's what we know is happening behind closed doors. Higher rates of credit card subscriptions to pornographic websites. That's what Google shows us is happening behind closed doors. Next, Google Trend data finds the terms indicating searches for pornography more often searched for in states with higher aggregated religiosity, okay? Then in a 2017 study found that higher percentages of evangelical Protestant theists and biblical literalists, okay, predicted more Google searches for terms like pornography, sex tape, lesbian porn, amateur porn, and free porn, okay, as did high rates of religious service adherence, and they don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. You have to light up the language centers of the brain. That's the way values are internalized. You sit down and you talk to your kids about why this is antithetical to your beliefs. And it's harder for us. It's not easier for us because of our values. It's harder for us because we're less likely to be out in the open about it. So let's summarize what some interventions are. None of this is going to be surprising. Study after study about teaching your kids how to handle this aspect of the internet in a healthy way finds what our rabbis told us back to the times of the Talmud, 3 times of the Babylonian Talmud. The key to parenting is authoritative parenting, the balance between love and limits. Well, love, no limits, as I said last time I was here. Our kids grow up to be overindulged and to have very little in the way of controls. All limits, no love, rules without relationships, equals rebellion. The key, which is hard, is to find the middle path. To find the middle path, which we know as Jews is what we really believe in. And the research shows that when you do that, so your kid knows they could come to you with anything that they're worried about. And they know that you're on top of them, but not in a way that's so overbearing that they go underground with it. Because they could go to a friend's house. We can't just, the simple thing maybe, okay, throw these things away. Do you know how easy it is for them with the money from one babysitting job to go to a local store and buy one of these things now? How inexpensive they've become? And you could pick it up on wireless all over the place. Or to go to a friend's house that doesn't have the same kind of supervision, or to go to a library. It's just a reality, okay? Adolescent sexual activities. I just want to share with you the research. You know what in general is associated with responsible behavior in this area? It's no magic. No magic. It's all the wisdom that you know about parenting, okay? Here's what massive amounts of research over the last few decades show, okay? Poor family relationships predict premature sexual activity, especially a poor relationship between a father and his daughter, okay? Early sexual activity among adolescents is associated with early use of alcohol and drugs and poor social adjustment several years later. One of the things I ask kids, I said, I have a weird question to ask you. Why is it, when I meet with girls in our community, I say, why is it that every study shows the year after a high school girl gets involved in her first sexual experiences, why is it that she becomes depressed? Why is it that her grades go down? And I try to get them thinking. Because the reality is, sexuality is such a powerful force. It takes us away from the work of adolescence. The work of adolescence is to discover who you are, not to get pulled into only one relationship. I mean, sometimes it happens and it could be great. But the key is that we have to teach our children to understand what's behind this. This isn't just religious mumbo-jumbo. There's a deep wisdom behind it. Grades fall significantly, and when I ask kids to think about it, it gets them thinking. They like it when we talk to them about this, as long as it's not done in a judgy kind of way. Okay? Here's a large-scale study with, I think, was it over 12,000 people in the leading medical journal in the United States. What's predictive of the onset of risky sexual behavior? Perceived school connectedness, okay? Parent-family connectedness, the lack of that, I mean. Parental expectations, clarity about your expectations. In my earlier talk, I talked about the clarity in the homes of future righteous Gentiles. Making clear to your kids, this is how I feel about this. Here's why, but I feel very strongly about it. Guess what? You may think that your adolescent doesn't care about what you say. You know, adolescents like to pretend they don't care. The name of the best-selling book on adolescence in the United States is Mom, Would You Get Out of My Life? But first, would you take me and Cheryl to the mall? Okay? So, but when parents disapprove, it makes a massive kind of difference. Okay? And let me go on now, because I'm getting the sign that I have to wrap this up. But I made my main points. Let me go on now with the interventions that we know work. Okay? Here's interventions. Okay? This is what recent research is showing. It's just common sense, straight out of what our value system has been telling with us. Common sense. Make it harder. Okay? Obviously, the first thing you do is you do a cleanse. You get rid of the computers that have this. You make it harder. You change the associations by moving around the furniture in a room that's been associated with pornography. You track progress. I talked about how to handle setbacks and how to see it as a way of growing. Wonderful sight, which I've become more familiar with lately. It's not what you think. It's not some kind of unsophisticated site. Guard Your Eyes website, which is an Orthodox Jewish website. It's free, has incredibly good materials and all kinds of strategies on how to help our children who are becoming addicted to pornography to get better help with it. Guard Your Eyes, it's here in South Africa also. Very wonderful, wonderful site. I met with organizers a number of times. I'm just so impressed with what they do, okay? And then it's all about stress, teaching people how to monitor stress, teaching people how to come up with alternative activities. How do you live your life in a way that you're pulled into the positive, not just avoiding the negative, okay? And the main thing is to remember in these conversations, you don't want it to be a lecture. To be understood, first understand. But ultimately, it's all about connection. I'm going to end with a story. Okay, I'm going to end with a story. It goes like this. A number of years ago, I'm invited to speak at a homeless conference for homeless people. I was very excited. Figured, what could be more interesting than hanging around with a bunch of homeless people and learning from them and talking to them. It's an address somewhere in Manhattan, and I get there, and I'm looking at the address. I didn't realize it was the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom in Manhattan, one of the fanciest venues at the time in Manhattan, 400 well-dressed professionals who specialize in delivering services to the homeless. 2 speakers at the conference, there's me, and then the guy who had to have been the main speaker, the guy who is incredibly impressive guy, incredibly impressive. He's dressed in a, incredibly fancy suit, very good-looking guy. Then you read his CV. Bachelor's from Harvard, PhD from Harvard. Last year, it says, he won an Oscar for a documentary he made on homelessness. He's in charge of homeless policy for the United States government. And I'm thinking, why am I speaking here? I was like, I wanted to go home, okay? So he was the first speaker, and he gets up speaking to this audience, and his opening line was so shocking that you almost saw 450 people faint in their seats. Here was his opening line. He said, when I was 11 years old, in front of me, my father, in a coked-up rage, ended his life, first ended my mother's life, and then ended his. Right in front of me, he says, I was an only child. I looked older than my age, and I run away. I was living in a terrible neighborhood. I knew how dangerous it could be to be raised in the foster care system. And I run away. And I go for the next 2 years living a horrific, totally, totally meaningless life. I'd go to a homeless shelter. I was traumatized. I needed to talk to people. I couldn't. Because the second they'd know how old I was, they'd throw me in foster care. The second I thought they were on to me, I'd go to another shelter. He says 2 years of nonstop running away, living in fear, and having those horrible images of the end of my parents' life. He said, till I came to a shelter in Manhattan. And in that shelter, the director of the shelter said 4 words that forever changed my life, and is the reason why I'm here. Because of those 4 words. You see, 450 pens come out, 450 pieces of paper. He says, put your pens away. It's not the words, it's how they were spoken. I come into a shelter, the director looks at me, and he says, how are you doing? And he meant it. I could see through his eye contact, I could see through the focus, I could see he really wanted to know how I was doing. And I started to tell him. And the more I told him, the more I wanted to tell him. And I spent the next 2 months spending a tremendous amount of time talking to him. After a couple of months of this, he sees I'm pretty smart. And he gets me a full scholarship to the Dalton School, the finest private school probably in the United States. From there, I get a full scholarship to Harvard for my bachelor's, for my doctorate. I'm here because of those 4 words. That's the antidote. That's the antidote. How are you doing to be there present for our children? To really let them know no matter what they do, we love them. To let them know that we're going to help them with this. To let them know that we believe in them. to be clear with them about our values, and to not be embarrassed to share it with them. They want to know. If you woke them up in the middle of the night and you say, whose opinion do you care about most? They'd say, yours, in spite of what that name of that book is, okay? And that's what we have to hold on to. We have to hold on to that as the ultimate antidote. Again, I'm going to share my PowerPoints with whoever the people are here, so you'll be able to get more information on this, and some references for all the talks I've given that might be able to go into more depth. And thank you, everybody.